Online. Okay, good afternoon, Hub members, other members of the Council and members of the public who may be listening in. I'd like to start this meeting, if I may, by just reflecting on the events that happened a few weeks ago, where Sir David Amess was tragically killed conducting his constituency surgery. And if I may, we're going to in a minute stand and have a minute's silence just in his memory. I'd also like to mention at the same time James Brokenshire MP, who also died in tragic circumstances, taken far too young. James was Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government and was a really good friend of local government. So with those two individuals in mind, I wonder if we could just stand for a minute's silence. Hello. Thank you, members. So I'd like to welcome you to the meeting of the Hub Committee on the 2nd of November. And first item on the agenda, if I can get to it, is apologies for absence. I believe we have two apologies, Mr. White.
We do, thank you, Leader. Good afternoon, members. We've got apologies from Councillors Leach and Pearce for this afternoon's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. White. Item 2 is declarations of interest. Members are invited to declare any personal or disclosable pecuniary interests, including the nature and extent of any such interest they may have, in any items to be considered at this meeting. Does anyone have any declaration they would like to make? Thank you, members. Thank you. Item 3, items requiring urgent attention. I've not been advised of any, Mr. White.
Neither have I, thank you, Leader.
Item 4, confirmation of minutes. If we could just run through the minutes for accuracy and completeness. Anything, members, on page 1? Page 2? Page 3? Page 4? Page 5? Page 6? And page 7. If there's no comments, I'm prepared to take those as a true record of the meeting. Thank you, Mr. White.
Thank you.
Item 5 on the agenda is public questions. Again, I don't believe we have any public questions.
That's correct, thank you, Leader.
And item 6, Hub Committee Forward Plan. You have in front of you, members, a note of the Hub Committee Forward Plan. Just like members do, check that for accuracy and make any comments that they might like to make about any of the items that are coming up. Does anyone wish to add anything at this stage? Okay, Councillor Cheadle.
Yeah, I'd just like to make the point that the forward plan doesn't currently include review of the plan for West Devon and the delivery plan, and I think we've agreed that it must, and I understand that that's in hand.
Thank you. If we could note that, Mr. White. Thank you. I would like to raise one issue. On our list for the 7th of December is a paper on community housing governance. We have had feedback, of course, on the community housing schemes for Lamerton and Brentor, and we have got some meetings coming up over the next few weeks. What I would like to bring forward with the agreement of the lead member and the chief exec is a more wide-ranging review of housing. The situation in the borough is, of course, one where housing is becoming of increasing importance. We would like to have a wide-ranging look at how we can influence that area and look at what we can do in partnership with others, and come up with at least the start of a plan for dealing with the housing situation. So I have had a conversation with the chief exec this morning, and I think we would like to bring that forward and work with the lead member in order to do that, if that's okay, Councillor.
Indeed, that is to be encouraged and to establish exactly what the need is locally. So I would fully support that.
Thank you, Councillor Ratcliffe. Thank you. Any other comments or observations on the forward plan, members? Thank you. In which case, I'd like to move forward to item 7 on the agenda, the Planning Improvement Plan Phase 2. And if I could ask Councillor Mott to introduce the paper, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Members are aware that we brought a paper to the Hub Committee in September outlining the first phase of our improvement plan, and this is the second one of that, with the third to be brought to you in December. You can see from the document what we proposed to do. I won't insult your intelligence by going through it word for word. Any questions, members?
Thank you, Councillor. Any questions? I've no questions. Councillor Mott, would you like to make the recommendation?
Thank you, Chair. In that case, I would move the 3 recommendations as detailed on page 13 if you have a paper copy, or page 15 if you're following on ModGov. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I have a seconder for those recommendations, please? Thank you, Councillor Cheadle. Members, any debate? Thank you. There's no debate. Obviously a very good paper, so thank you to all involved in that. Very clear. We'll move straight to a vote. All those in favour?
That is unanimous. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. If we could move then to item 8 on the agenda, which is the tenancy strategy review. And if I could ask Councillor Ratcliffe to introduce this paper.
Thank you, Chair. The recommendations are that we approve the reviewed tenancy strategy 2021 and Appendix 2 and authorise the Head of Housing in consultation with the portfolio holder for homes to make any necessary minor amendments to the tenancy strategy. Our tenancy strategy was first adopted by members in 2012. We have had some minor amendments in 2016, so it is now due for a further review. This is the requirement under the Localism Act of 2011. It is also a key action in the housing strategy. We have consulted with our registered providers, partners, and the only real change other than the legislative update statistics is a 2-week rent in advance we are asking for. So that is what we're proposing and the main change. We will also emphasise that we are now seek rent tenure on new housing developments in accordance with the adopted Joint Local Plan Supplementary Planning Document 2020. The recommendation to members is to approve the adoption of this review, Tenancy Strategy 2011. And Chairman, I'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Councillor Ratcliffe. Members, any questions? Councillor Crozier.
I'm new to this, and I just wanted to know what you say 2 weeks in advance or rent in advance. Is this a bond, or is this in other words, held as a bond for future mispayments, or what?
Thank you, Councillor Crozier. Can I ask Alex Rehak, who's sitting behind me, if she'll take this question? Oh, sorry.
Good afternoon, members. Yeah, the rent in advance that housing associations request, it is what it is. They don't pay a deposit or a damage deposit like you would do if you went into a private rented accommodation. You just have to pay a certain amount of rent in advance. Some housing associations have started to ask for a little bit more. We're trying to cap it at that 2 weeks to make it more affordable for people.
Thank you for that explanation. Thank you.
Any other questions, members? Councillor Daniel.
Thank you. I just was looking at the authorisation for the head of housing in consultation with the portfolio holder to make minor adjustments to the tenancy strategy. Will any of that come towards, to be reviewed by HUB afterwards, or is that taken as read once that's agreed, that you make the changes?
Take it, yes.
I would have thought that any major legislation changes or any major changes to that document would have to come back to committee. Very minor things, potentially that now we're only asking for, housing associations are only asking for 1 week's rent in advance. Oh, for example, we changed that policy to reflect that. I don't think we would have to bring that back, but obviously we'd seek guidance as and when any changes were proposed, whether it came back to committee or not. Is that all right?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Rehag. Yeah, we would be delegating that authority to make minor amendments. So, yes, and again, the monitoring officer would be available to understand whether something was minor or not. But thank you for the question. Any other questions, members? In which case, Councillor Ratcliffe, could I ask you to move the recommendations?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would like to move the recommendations. They're set out on the page 21. Namely, to approve the review of the Tenancy Strategy 2021 and Appendix A, and to authorise the Head of Housing in consultation with the portfolio holder for homes to make any necessary minor amendments to the Tenancy Strategy 2021.
Thank you, Councillor. The recommendation makes reference to Appendix 2, just for clarity. Could we have a seconder for the recommendation, please? Thank you, Councillor Cheadle. Members, any debate? Councillor Mott.
Thank you. Scanning down through the appendix on page 7 of the appendix, which is page 33 or 35, depending on what you're looking at. I am concerned about the sentence that says that disposals may be appropriate in certain circumstances, and I'm sorry because this might sort of stray into a question, so my apologies. I am concerned, given the need for affordable housing, that these providers are able to dispose of properties and not then replace them within the housing stock. And I just wanted to register that concern.
Thank you, Councillor Mott. I think it's a real concern. I think Councillor Crozier might want to add something to that debate as well.
Yes, I would. My concern is not only that, but in the locality where these houses are taken out from, they should be able to replace affordable homes where if they sell one, they should replace one in that locality. We're a very wide-ranging lot of villages where there's housing association houses in many, many villages. We could get out of kilter very quickly if we allow them to sell properties in one village and not replace them.
Thank you, Councillor. I wonder whether Mrs. Rehak has a view on that. I suspect that the demand must be driven in that sense by the assessed housing need, but I wonder to what extent the housing associations do take account of that, and is there anything we can do to have discussions with them to make sure that that need is addressed as fully as possible?
So there's very little that we can do to put a stop to a housing association disposing of properties. We can ask them to replace them. In a lot of places that will happen through the new build programme that they have coming through. In the smaller rural areas, this is a problem, and we have been in discussions with them for quite a period of time to try to find some solutions in certain areas where this has been happening. There is another meeting that's due to take place shortly, and it is something that will be raised with the Chief Executive. Particularly, obviously, Live West is our largest housing association that operates in the borough. It's got all of the ex-council stock. So that is something that we will be discussing at that meeting. It's not quite so much of an issue with the other smaller RPs that are operating in our area, but where the old council stock sits, that's where we're having issues due to the properties not reaching a certain standard. And some of it is extremely poor. And we don't object to those properties being disposed of, but we ask for them to be replaced in whatever manner they can.
Thank you, that's very helpful, and I think it ought to be something we discuss at the upcoming meeting, and along with any other ideas as to how we can boost the numbers of housing stock. If I could bring in Chief Exec to comment there, thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, the meeting is arranged for next week, I believe, involving yourself and the three main RSLs covering this part of Devon. We're acutely aware of this issue, this challenge, and we'll be absolutely challenging them over it at that meeting. And as we've discussed, we'll bring back that wider housing report to Hub in due course, so I think we can pick the issue up there. Of course, we are investing in our own expertise and capacity in order that we can update our housing needs assessments as well, and as we get that information, we'll feed that into the conversation. So I'm sure we'll be having a lively debate with the RSLs at our meeting next week. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor.
Yeah, I do share the members' concerns on this as well, particularly with regard when we're looking at planning development coming forward where there is a demand for affordable, which includes social housing, and the impact that is having on rural communities, and how the villages themselves don't really want large developments. This is what's coming back from the villages rather than through a neighbourhood plan or whatever it may be, and I realise that therefore that's unevidenced, but you know, whether this is something that there can be a bit of joined up thinking in this, in the sense that there is a need for social housing, and there is a need for social housing in villages as much as there is within the towns. And that so if you've got a registered service social provider selling off the housing stock and then replacing it in the towns, it's causing huge impact on those very local communities, whereby any development that occurs then, it is causing more issues, I think, rather than dealing with the lack of available social housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And yes, I share that view, and I do wonder, and perhaps this is a topic for discussion, how much of that and how many of those decisions are driven by the business model that the housing associations want to adopt rather than the actual need of the communities and the residents within the borough. So that will be an interesting one to explore. Councillor Mott.
My apologies, Chair, because this is going to be a question now. What checks do we put on the properties to make sure that they cannot be repaired and that the only thing that can be done with them is to sell them?
We do get a comprehensive report from the Housing Association that details the costs involved, the amount of, if anything can ever reach a standard, a safe energy standard or a reasonable energy standard required. Quite a lot of them the costs are going through the roof at the moment, and that's the reason why we do look at those business cases that they put forward. But again, we are limited as to what we can do in terms of saying, no, you're not getting rid of it.
So apologies, Chair. So is there no, could they then effectively adopt a benign neglect of properties?
Difficult one to answer, Councillor. They shouldn't, because they're losing rent all the time. Those properties are empty, so they should be making sure that they are used correctly. They get a lot of complaints from communities where properties are just left to be abandoned, in effect. And I've never known of one do that here. That's my answer. Sorry.
Perhaps that's something that we need to get ONS to follow up on then, or
Thank
like
you.
you say, part of the debate that's going to come, no doubt.
We will follow that up, I think, in the meeting that is coming up. It's important that we are not seen to be painting the housing associations with any particular brush, but these are all concerns that I think anecdotally have come to us as members from time to time, and we must make sure with the housing crisis that there is, that we do our level best for people who need those resources. So we will do that. Any other debate, members? Councillor Daniel.
Is that working out? Yes, thank you. I was just making an observation that's a bit of a question, so again, apologies. But I'm thinking of a particular tenant in social housing that I've been dealing with. The house is in very poor quality, very poor standard, very damp. And she's particularly concerned. And I'm thinking, what are we able to bring any pressure to bear on housing associations about the standards of housing that have tenants in them? What can we do about that?
I think if I can come in here, we have a member day organised, and it's in the diary. And what I want to do, I was going to say later on, but I will take the opportunity now, is if anybody has agenda questions for that meeting, if they can send them to me, we can prepare an agenda which is fair to the officers, and they can come in with a detailed reply there. So if you could wait until that day, which I think is the 7th of December. And if you can let me have it before then, and I'll make sure it is there. But does that answer your question? Is that? Thank you.
Just coming on that point really quickly, though, about your question, I just had a message from the opposite side of the room to say that environmental health can step in and obviously deal with problems that aren't being rectified by the housing association, and that's quite simple for us to obviously make a referral, make sure that they're bringing that house back up to standard, especially in the terms of the damp, like you said. And it could just be some advice for the tenant about opening windows and things, but some of it can be a bit more serious than that. I understand that.
Thank you. And I think the general condition of properties will be a topic for discussion when we have our meeting with the housing associations as well. And I think it's important in that context. I mean, we're looking for ways in which we can perhaps work together with them and support them, and also other options that we might have as a local authority whereby we can boost the housing stock. So hopefully there'll be a lot of good ideas on the table, and we will report back in December. Any other debate, members? In which case we will go to the vote. So all those who are in favour of the recommendations?
7 unanimous. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. If we can move now to agenda item 9, Fusion Lifestyle, the leisure contract support update. This paper was to have been presented by Councillor Leach, who unfortunately is not able to be with us. So if I may, I'm going to ask Councillor Edmonds to briefly introduce the paper, ably supported by Mr. Brooke. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, yeah, the COVID-19 pandemic continues to impact the current use and recovery of leisure centres across the country. And obviously, challenging conditions still affecting Fusion lifestyle. So this report provides you with an update on current performance levels, the recovery and business impact within the contract, and proposed contract variations so as to mitigate those impacts. One of the recommendations on the report is to adjust the future management fee profile to reflect the impact of the pandemic. And it's felt that this provides the best footing for the leisure centres within the district. So the variation doesn't actually vary the total management fee due to be received over the contract period. That remains the same. So the impact is one of timing and the impact on the overall profile of cash flow and revenue income from the management fee payable. I should say at this point that the appendices contain restricted information, and therefore if members wish to discuss those in detail, we would need to move into part 2. But Appendix A, it sets out the proposed management fee, and that actually there is a shortfall, as you can see, in income of the management fee in 2021-22, and the recommendation is to fund this shortfall from the COVID losses earmark reserve in 21-22. From 22-23 and onwards, the management fee income would be in excess of the current budgeted income level. So, just referring to our corporate plan, obviously the plan for West Devon, strengthening community well-being. It's a high-level theme within the plan, and a key action within the delivery plan is to secure the provision of high-quality and accessible leisure services. So there is the balance to be struck, I guess. So if I can perhaps just take you back to the recommendations on page 57. There are 3 recommendations. Obviously, asking the committee to note the performance of the contract to date. It also gives some commentary on the wider market trends. And to recommend to Council the contract variation and changes to the management fee profile. And as I said, the recommendation to fund the shortfall in income in 21-22 from the COVID losses earmark reserve. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. It seemed like a real hospital pass coming as it did at about 1 minute to 2. So I'm very grateful to you for stepping in. Mr. Brooke, is there anything you would wish to add at this point, or you're here for questions if needed?
I couldn't follow such a great introduction, so thank you, Chairman. I will remain quiet.
Thank you. So, members, any questions? Councillor Mott.
Thank you, Chair. Given that we are expected to give high quality provision for recreation, can I ask please how Fusion are going to deal with the various complaints that we see about the standards of cleanliness, the attitude of staff, and how we are going to get them to resolve this, please?
Thank you, Councillor Mott. I think this is a recurring theme among members who are local to the leisure centres. There has been some anecdotal evidence that on reopening, perhaps the service levels haven't been as good as we might have expected. I know I have had a conversation with Mr. Parkins about that, and he has relayed it on, but I wonder, Mr. Brooke, whether you've got any comments on that.
Thank you, Chairman, and absolutely right. Very good point to raise. So, separate from this issue, but nonetheless absolutely valid, we aspire to be delivering the best leisure services because that's integral with people coming back and using the services so that they get the personal benefit, and so we ensure the contract remains solid. And we manage that through our quarterly meets, at a formal level with Fusion. Now, we have one coming up next couple of weeks, and they know that we have asked them specifically on this point, and it's been raised by John. He's there, so he can take some questions if it's needed. So we're expecting from them answers to those questions. And of course, the portfolio holder will be able to raise, and I can raise on your behalf, any other specific points. And we are also asking them around the recovery phase and what actions they're looking to deliver to maximise their chances of success. And obviously that varies depending on what the tasks are and the activities are, because group activity is coming back more strongly, as is swimming, but gym attendance is very low. So they have different challenges in different sectors. So that's the mechanism and the forum through which we'll be having those quite challenging conversations. And they do need to be challenging because it's a partnership and we're doing our part and they need to do theirs.
Thank you, Mr. Brooke. Do you want to come back on that at all, Councillor Mott?
I'll try and think of it as and keep it succinct and pithy as you know I can, Chair.
Councillor Cheadle.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I wish Fusion, all the best because it's such an important resource we've got here. But I'm puzzled on whether they have an actual plan to improve their performance, because they not only have to get their performance back to where it was to start with, they actually have to get their performance back better than it was to start with, so that they can make up the ground that's been lost. And my question, I suppose, is, have we seen any evidence that they have a set of ideas which they want to put into practice, or are we just hoping that they do?
Thank you, Chairman, and Councillor Cheadle. So the fundamental principles upon which their forecast usage was based, as was set out on the improvements to the offer. So it's nothing radical or indeed unusual. It's purely about the physical investment in the centres, which we facilitated through the loan that we've given to them. And so it is quite a straightforward plan, and it's just about improving the two leisure centres so they can be the best they can be within an economic sort of sensible envelope, and that's what they have now delivered. And that's a long-term investment paid back in usage terms over the full life of the contract. So if the pandemic hadn't happened, what we would have seen is an uptake in membership, and what we would be hoping we would be doing is comparing that with their forecast and going, oh look, it's up or it's down or it's broadly similar. And it has started to track in the right direction, or was starting to, but we weren't anticipating them having got any form of material return on that investment at this stage of the contract, and that would have been in the absence of a pandemic. But now that we've had the pandemic, their work is all that bit harder. So I totally accept your point, and that's really where it comes down to them ensuring that they do everything they can, as per the previous comment, on cleanliness and accessibility and the right membership structures and really understanding their target audience. But it's those are the minor tweaks they've got to do around the core offer, and the core offer was really about improving the centres, and they have now done that. So probably the answer is we just have to make sure that they do everything they can to make that a success.
Thank you. Councillor Mott, do you want to come back on that?
Thank you. Yes, sorry, it probably won't be very succinct or pithy. My concern is that they were kind of bowling along before the pandemic. We've given them this loan. They don't seem to have improved on the cleanliness or the service. They don't seem to be encouraging members. I know of several private gyms that are bursting at the seams with members and are doing very well and did extremely well throughout the pandemic by offering sessions online and and they have bounced back and they continue to see membership runs. It's not through the lack of public wanting to take part in these activities. It's not through their lack of interest in getting fitter or being back in these places. But I do not see Fusion doing anything to encourage the public back to the centres. And we've been going round and round on this question on several occasions, and we don't seem to see any improvement from them or any plan or any enthusiasm about being able to take this forward.